Welcome to another installment of Monday Q&A. I hope you've all had a fantastic weekend. Thank you to everybody who submitted a question for this week's Q&A. If you'd like me to answer one of your questions next week, simply put it in the comments section below. A little bit of housekeeping and some announcements. If you're in Perth this Thursday night, I will be at Addicted to Audio in Subiaco for a series called Scratching the Surface, where I'm going to be interviewed and I'm going to talk about some music that has inspired me and a little bit about my musical career, which should be a whole bunch of fun. It is free but ticketed. I'll put a link in the video description if you want to check that one out. And in a little under 2 weeks, Ragdoll are doing not one but two shows in Melbourne. We're at the Northcote Social Club on Saturday, March the 4th, and then at Whole Lot of Love in Brunswick East on the Sunday. It should be a whole bunch of fun. I'm also at the Melbourne Guitar Show. I've got 2 workshops on the Sunday. More information about that to come. But if you're there, come and hang out. I would love to see some of you there. Let's get into this week's questions. Have I thought about upgrading my studio monitors? I have. I probably go through that process once a year, and then I crank my Adams A7Xs up and I listen to them and I think about the number of times that I've used them and they've been good to me, and it kind of comes down to it, if it ain't broke, don't fix it sort of thing at the moment. I don't do any commercial mixing or anything like that, so investing a whole bunch of money into monitors probably isn't the wisest decision. I could probably put it into other places, but I do love the way my Adams sound and I'm used to them. So I know if I get something out of them here, how that is kind of going to translate to other systems, which is probably the most important thing, is that you know how your monitors respond and you've got experience mixing on them or dialing in tones on them and having them translate to other systems. What am I using for drop D on a Les Paul style scale length? Well, I normally use Elixir 10 to 52s on my PRS 245, which has a Les Paul-ish scale length on it. I use that in drop C. I'd use the same thing in drop D as well. I actually just put some DR 11 to 54s on one of my old Les Pauls, and I've got it tuned to drop C sharp. So yeah, maybe like 10 to 52 would be totally fine in drop D on a Les Paul. I kind of like the way that feels, but you know, so much of this comes down to personal preference. Some people like their drop tunings to be, you know, really, really taut and firm. Others don't mind a bit of flub in there, and I kind of lean towards the flub on there. I kind of like that feeling, and it, you know, reminds me of old Sabbath or something like that. Why aren't zero frets standard on electric guitars? I will just say that I'm a big fan of the zero fret, the Roberto Lassi that I have here. Actually, it's in a box waiting to be collected so that I can send it back to South Africa for some upgrades, but there'll be a video about that at a later date. Stay tuned for that one. Anyway, it's got a zero fret and there's string guide stainless steel frets. I think it just works incredibly well. Even the quite affordable Enya acoustic travel guitar that I had here recently had a zero fret that was really well implemented and it worked nicely. So I would say the reason we don't see more of them is, you know, they weren't on the classic electric guitar designs that came out in the 50s, like so many things. You know, why doesn't Gibson fix the issue with their headstocks? Why doesn't Fender have contoured neck heels on all of their guitars? You know, people want these specs and the market is dictating that people are happy to go out and buy those things and not worry about them. But if you look at a lot more of the kind of, let's say, modern, refined versions of those instruments, I think you're starting to see it a whole lot more, especially on guitars that are, say, headless, where you just have kind of like a nut and then, you know, some kind of block behind there on the headstock. To me, that makes a lot of sense to have a zero fret on there. So I'm a big fan of zero frets, as you can probably guess. I understand why they're not standard, because so many things I like are not standard on electric guitars, and that is part of the fun, going on that quest, finding the specs that you want on a particular instrument. I mentioned last week I'm a big Jorn Lande fan. Am I a fan of Ark Burn the Sun? That's the band Ark and the album Burn the Sun. One of my favorite Jorn Lande albums, one of my favorite albums out there. This question came from friend of the channel and patron Marcelo, who I know has some pretty immaculate taste in music. So thanks for the question, Marcelo. I do love that album. I love the kind of diversity of material on there. There are tracks that are super heavy and technical. John Macalusso's drumming is amazing. Tor Moren, who was in a band with another one of my favorite singers, Roy Khan, in the 90s, I think, called Conception. Conception are awesome. The playing is off the chart. It's almost like if you took Yngwie and Yngwie wanted to start a Dream Theater style band, but those two concepts actually worked together. So I really, really like some of these songs on that album, including there's like a kind of, Latin-inspired acoustic song on there. There's some really nice ballads. There's some just crushingly heavy stuff. There's some stuff that kind of almost sounds like hair metal. Jorn's obviously an incredible singer, and I think vocally it is one of their best albums. So there's my recommendation for the week. Go and check out Arc Burn the Sun. Have I ever checked out a Marshall Silver Jubilee? This is one of the two Marshalls I really need to get around to trying out in depth and to do some demos with. The other, of course, being the mighty JVM. I thought there was a JVM for sale at my local cash converters a couple of weeks ago, and I went down to buy it. I had the cash in hand. I saw it advertised and just wasn't there in the store, which was a bit disappointing. So I digress, because I would also love to try a Silver Jubilee. From what I understand, very different to the typical Marshall style circuit out there. So you kind of just need to dial them in a little bit differently. Some of my favorite Marshall tones that I've ever heard are Silver Jubilee tones, namely Joe Bonamassa, the way Joe is using a Jubilee earlier in their career. That kind of quad amp setup is pretty amazing. But I also saw Joe at the Perth Concert Hall playing through a JCM 900. Sounded exactly like Joe, and then the next time through a Marshall DSL, and it sounded exactly like them. So maybe they just have those magic fingers. Well, they definitely have those magic fingers, because you hear Joe play through an old Tweed Twin, and it kind of just sounds like them. But I digress. The Silver Jubilee, I would love to try one out. If you're in Perth and you have a JVM or a Silver Jubilee that you don't mind letting me borrow for like a week or something like that, I'll make a pretty mean cup of tea, so hit me up. Chorus on distortion as opposed to clean tones, how do I approach dialing it in? My kind of go-to for a chorus on a distorted sound is rate at 0, depth all the way up, and then you just kind of move them back towards one another to find the sweet spot. I kind of like the subtle stuff, players like Alex Lifeson, the way they would use chorus on their distorted tones, the ADA chorus style thing that you would have heard players like Paul Gilbert and probably Nuno Betancourt. I don't know if Nuno used a chorus, but maybe live, who knows? That kind of thing where the rate's really low and the depth's high, almost like a spatial expander, is my go-to for dirty stuff. I've got loads of different videos demoing everything from cheap chorus pedals to boutique chorus pedals to rack-mounted chorus, I guess, racks, you would say. As I like to call them, though, it's all the different flavors of chori out there. You can go and check out my channel for all of those. And I always put a distorted section in there because I love chorus on distortion as well as on clean tones. Most chorus pedal demos you hear, just the whole time it's on a clean sound. So I do make a point of doing that when I do demos. Go and check those out if you're interested. One last question for this week. What do I think is a bigger potential reunion, Marty Friedman with Megadeth or Richie Sambora with Bon Jovi? Bon Jovi, without doubt, are a bigger band than Megadeth. More people know about them. But having said that, I think their mass appeal doesn't really rely on the fact that people know who Richie Sambora is. Guitar players obviously know who Richie Sambora is. But I think in the kind of guitar playing sphere, everyone knows Marty Friedman, and everyone knows Megadeth, and everyone who likes Megadeth thinks that Marty in Megadeth is the ultimate lineup of Megadeth. So I would probably argue that Marty rejoining Megadeth would be a much bigger deal for the metal community and for guitar players than Richie rejoining Bon Jovi. What do you think? That's it for this week. A reminder, I'm at Addicted to Audio in Subiaco this week. If you're in Perth, you can come and catch a free event and hear me talk about all my favorite music. Ragdoll are going to be in Melbourne in less than 2 weeks. Very, very excited about that. And I'll also be at the Melbourne Guitar Show. If you've got questions for next week, put them in the comment section below. Have a great week, and I'll see you next Monday. Cheers.